Poems and prose by Adam Nadasdy. Poems in translation by Christopher White.
Better staying put. The thing I can't cope with is rushing on, such as...
You fall asleep.
Then you wake up.
You fall in love.
And then start hating them.
When guests are going to come around.
You stand around in the shop not knowing what to do.
Hoping to turn into a party giver.
Once they've left.
The furniture needs to be pushed back where it goes when you're alone.
That's when the going's tough.
But staying put.
That's great.
I'm a dab hand at being asleep, and being awake can give me lots of fun.
I'm happy when whole crowds come to visit.
When someone loves me.
And when no one does.
But rushing from one state of things into another state, that really puts me out.
I'd like to stay put till the end of time.
When I'm awake...
To watch attentively or...
When I'm sleeping.
Dig a deeper pit.
Dissolve the powdered soups of loneliness, or else sort through the mess my partner leaves.
What hurts is rushing.
Slipping through the narrow orifice of change leaves bruises later.
A true romance. It all began when I was about 9. One of my classmates, Steve Bertegny, a serious, long-faced boy, said his elder brother was taking English lessons from a certain Aunt Ella further down our street. We agreed that it'd be a good thing for us all to study English. We asked another classmate, Arnold Ziegler, if he was interested. He was. All the more so as his family was preparing to emigrate to Australia. He didn't tell us about this. Of course, it was strictly illegal even to think of emigration in 1955, and his father was in prison anyway. The same afternoon, we met outside Aunt Ella's house building, a grey, pompous, once elegant block. Went upstairs and rang. She was surprised and asked who we were. Bertegny said his brother came here for lessons and we wanted to study English too. Yes, Aunt Ella said, but do our parents know about this? No, we said, slightly wondering why that was relevant. I mean, there was nothing wrong with taking language lessons, was there? We assured her that we were willing to pay. She laughed and insisted that our parents should write or phone her. They did, and next week the lessons began. Aunt Ella wasn't old. It was custom to call adult women aunt. She was palpably bored, smoked during class, and varnished her nails, often both at the same time. Her husband would walk into the room half-dressed, looking for his tie. "Oh, the little professors," he would say, pretending to be surprised. When the revolution broke out in October 1956, the whole thing came to an end. Ziegler and his family left the country. Bertegny and I were ordered by our parents to stay at home. With hindsight, Aunt Ella was no good. Her English must have been minimal. She had no idea of teaching, the lessons were ridiculous and totally ineffective. There was no textbook. I mean, this wasn't her fault. English was not taught in schools, and you could not buy English books anywhere. You either had them or you didn't. But at least she taught us do, does, did, and he, she, it, and the like. She dictated Hungarian sentences, which we had to translate into English for homework. When does the Easter rabbit come? The Easter rabbit comes at Easter. Many years later, I realized that her teaching amounted to a vicious caricature of the grammar translation method. She also said, I still remember, that the word men is peculiarly irregular because in the plural, the spelling changes to men, but the pronunciation remains the same. But I had been initiated, and this was the first foreign language I had consciously begun to study.
Ars Poetica. It's just the same as for the candy floss man who, prodding his stick into the totally empty, slightly battered spinning cauldron, waits, summoning all his strength up in the hope things will work out as they usually do. Suddenly, as if from nothingness, a strand attaches itself to the stick's tip. The children look on wide-eyed. Now another strand. He starts turning it gingerly as the next strand arrives and searches for a place amongst the ones already there. The candy floss man's less tense now. He hums a tune, moves his weight to the other leg, looks up. The ball keeps getting bigger, and he can decide which way he wants it, whether longish or broad and flattened out. The children start grinning as something frozen and sweet gets born out of thin air, from nothingness. It doesn't always work that way. At times, the candy floss man merely stands, absorbed, holding the stick inside the cauldron, jabs around a bit and falters, but gets no result. The cauldron spins and clatters, light sparkles on the dents in it. Children look at one another. As for him, well, all he does is chew at his moustache.
Time, an apple. They left a stool there just for him. He huddled on it. Then the kindergarten woman gave him an apple from her shopping bag, one of her own, more so he could hold it than bite into it, and he clutched it tightly, afraid to take another bite in case it vanished like the other children had. Don't worry, they'll be here to get you soon. He pressed his thumb against the bitten part, in case its appleness leaked out. They were tidying up, the woman and the two big adult girls. They tossed the teddy bears into the dark and gaping innards of the corner bench, then sat on it to close it with a thud, their backsides flat as irons. One teddy bear's head got slewed back. He could still see it through the slit. They shut it in and left him face to face with nothing else but time, round, with one bite taken out of it.
Liberation. To bite right through the peel of an orange, then put it back impudently from where it came, with the untouched half facing the shopkeeper. To summon the waiter. Oh, without meaning to, I swallowed the cup as well, but don't worry, I'll pay for all the cost. How ardently I longed for small steps towards personal growth, to perform pranks that show a hidden strength. Then one day I mustered all my courage, and yes, I asked for 19 roles. That's what my free inner self told me I should do, smiling at the assistant all the time. I took the bag. What to do with all these roles? I hadn't the heart to give them to a passerby.
As a teenager, my mother had asked around for an English teacher, and one of her colleagues suggested Eugene Zed, an official teacher of English at the Economics University, who was very expensive, 40 forints per hour in 1961. But who knew his job, no doubt about that. He was willing to squeeze me into his very tight schedule. The only problem was that he was a communist, or at least a party member, as my mother warned me, so I should be careful what I said. No stories about Uncle Paul's jamborees and open-air masses, please. I was big enough to hold my mouth and established a good working relationship with Eugene Zed, which went on for 5 years. Him I never called Uncle Eugene, partly because I was a teenager now, not a child, and partly because he was a stranger, a business partner, so to speak. He was a jovial, corpulent man with a cutting sense of humour. He was sorry, he said on the phone. He could not receive me in his university office because they had just forbidden staff members to give private lessons on the premises. But since the weather was good, we could meet outside the building and have our lesson on a bench. We tried, but it didn't really work. I felt so self-conscious. I insisted that he should teach me at his home, which was quite far away. You had to change trams twice, but I didn't mind. Another part of town, another country. I owe most of my English knowledge to this man. As I progressed fast, we often just talked about things or read poems or reconstructed Rolling Stones lyrics. I avoided politics, and he also stopped bringing it up after a few attempts. I don't know if he really was a communist. He spoke British English, and since I'd had a good grounding from Uncle Paul, Arthur and all, soon my pronunciation was better than my teacher's. Eugene Zed was the first to tell me about American English and demonstrated it on the word pullover, repeating it at least 8 times. Even his facial expression changed to indicate that we were now on the other side of the globe. In the meantime, I turned 16. It was 1962, and the Beatles were making their first successes. My friends and I were listening to Radio Luxembourg, 280 meters medium waves and 49.26 meters short waves coming to you right from the heart of Luxembourg, an offshore-type radio station geared towards England, where commercial broadcasting was not allowed at the time. It had advertisements. 4 kinds of Sunsilk shampoo. 1 is for you. Football pools and Irish hospital sweepstakes, which I never understood and still don't. Most importantly, they had pop music. The Stones, The Who, Marianne Faithfull. Was this the same country as that of Aunt Mimi's train and restaurant stories? I would spend night after night glued to the radio, listening to the fading and occasionally distorted sound on shortwaves, and learnt and learnt and learnt. My mother was a tailor, sold my new blue jeans. Doesn't make much sense. What did he wear then? Sewed my new blue jeans. Soon, my friends and I formed our own pop group, like everyone else at the time. I played the piano. Because I had a good English accent, I sang. The aim of these bands was to replicate as faithfully as possible what we heard on Luxy, as we called it, or on Radio Free Europe. I didn't understand everything I was singing, I must confess, but my accent was convincing, and I knew more English than anyone else around, so they couldn't check. We never made it to any real success, playing at school balls, local dances, and similar occasions. My love for English reached its maturity with the almost carnal experience of actually going to Britain for a week in the summer of 1963 when I was 17. We just went to Edinburgh, nowhere else, but it was fabulous. I could actually talk to native speakers, read the road signs, watch people talk to each other. I mean, I say watch, not listen, because I didn't understand much of their Scottish accent. When I took the milk bottles back and asked for a refund, the woman said, "You are not charged for the bottle." A real English sentence. She had to say it 3 times before I understood. Nothing could stop me after that from choosing English as a career. Eugene Zed, the communist, prepared me for my university entrance exam. There are also questions about one's political views, aren't there? I asked him. That's no problem, he said. Always say what you think. Then, after a pause, he added, but make sure you think what you have to say.
Tying my shoes. Bending down to tie my shoes, I feel I could be ageless, when in fact death gets down to business every day, without, at least for the time being, bringing me up short. Before I can withstand his gaze, I need to practice so I won't scream, weep stupidly. Right now, all I can do is tie my shoes, bowing my head and stare into the carpet, filthy, rich with movement, mixed with life. The real reason I bend over is I don't want him to find my laces hanging loose when he arrives. Therefore, I do them up properly.
The horse. The photo showed an ordinary horse, bored-looking, light brown. I merely assumed it was light brown because the photo was black and white, old, stiff and curved, trimmed zigzag at the edges, falling apart from being stuffed into so many pockets. On the horse, a nude woman was sitting, with permed hair and tapering boobs. Sandy's father brought the photo. He was small, with an idiotic smile because he drank too much. He never came into that room, knowing he wasn't welcome. But he had business now. He had to show the young lads what life was like in the big world. Not batting an eyelid, he extracted the photo from his pocket.
So what's this then?
He asked, unsteady on his feet, showing it to me first. After all, I was the guest. A horse, I answered, bored and nonetheless polite.
A horse?
Sandy's father muttered.
Take a closer look. Good God, that's all he sees. Nothing but the horse. That, oh so special taste. They're not to be had any longer. That oh so special joy. That taste I could combine for myself from any ingredients whatsoever. Margarine, sand. What mattered was the very thing in question must be me. That joy's no longer to be had. The tram I never took, but wanted to on the next day, has been dismantled. And they've closed the cinema I would never stepped inside. All sorts of things were to be had whose taste has ripened on my lips, definable. That joy's not to be had, however. The moment before you bite into a sweet.
Hungarian. A strange cake on the menu. You can be proud of anything if you really want to be proud. Ostriches, I suppose, are proud of not being able to fly. This would be an embarrassment to most birds, but oh, how fast an ostrich can run. Hungarians are proud of their language. Just because it's so different from all other European languages. Unable to express things like masculine and feminine, having no verb, having no word to have, but being able to express with a separate verb conjugation whether the object is indefinite or definite. Thus, látok means I see, while látom means I see it. Hungarian doesn't belong to the Indo-European family. The only other such languages in Europe are Finnish and Estonian, with these Hungarian is distantly related, Basque, Maltese, and Turkish. The Hungarian language is extreme, and so, they say, is the Hungarian temperament. Attractive, but unreliable. It accompanies you like a faithful friend, then at one point you turn around and it's gone, abandoning you to struggle with expressing yourself. Especially if you translate from or into Hungarian. Nothing is the same. Music is zene or muzsika, and the two have different connotations. I have a fever is Latham van, that is, fever mine is. The exchange, has the doctor gone home? Yes. Would be, hazament az orvos. Haza. That is, gone home the doctor. Home. Nowadays, nobody would seriously connect language with national character. But this was widely done in the Romantic period and after, all through the 19th century. The Hungarians realized they were so-called alone when all other nations established their linguistic family ties. Slavic, German, Celtic, and so on. Hungarians found no ties. Then scholars discovered around 1800 that the relatives of Hungarian were Finnish, Lappish, plus some little-known languages in Siberia. And they were very distant relatives, not like German and Danish or French and Italian, where the relations are easy to see. This was received with disbelief and disappointment, since people had expected something more spectacular. For another 100 years, amateur and not so amateur linguists were busy proving that Hungarian was related to Turkish, Japanese, Hebrew, Sumerian, or what you will. Not all Hungarians are happy with this language. Some can never learn it, either because they go away early or they come here late. Franz Liszt was proud of being Hungarian, but didn't speak the language because he came from a German-speaking family and spent most of his life outside Hungary. My grandfather, Eduard Ritter von Hübner, was born in Prague in 1883 and came to Hungary in 1920, but comfortably managed here with very little Hungarian till well into the 60s, when the last generation of German speakers began to disappear. I remember the national census of 1960. Since Opa didn't understand the questions, I filled in the questionnaire for him, translating into Hungarian till it came to anyanyelve, on the sheet, mother tongue. Muttersprache, said I. Ungarisch, said he, in German, of course. Aber Opa, du kannst ja gar nicht Ungarisch. I protested, preparing to write Német, German, into the form. I was 13. Dummes Kind, he shouted. What do you know about life? Write Magyar and shut up.
The 1950s. People may laugh at me, but the 1950s had their own pleasures.
Grandmother embodied another world when I got home.
The stove.
Complicity. Don't dare mention these things at school.
Everyone worrying, inside themselves as well as in their homes.
Gas meters behind curtains and old leather suitcases.
Secrets that set cheeks aglow. Things to be done on November the 7th.
Not that they were dissidents at home, they simply weren't able to understand it all. Floodwater can't be understood. You oppose every rational defence, then climb up onto the roof with a bundle.
At Mass, the national anthem, almost every Sunday. It mentioned God, so was inadmissible anywhere else. Cracking walnuts to a radio play, using a pitted, chopped off iron pyramid, we dropped onto them carefully. An object my grandfather somehow turned out to have. If asked, his eyes grew vague. Who could possibly care what they originally used it for?
Perhaps he looks back, but the waters. Not knowing how many strokes it's going to take, I swim on. The main thing is getting there, not how you do it. I'm no scholar, so the path's less interesting than the result. Maybe I'm a poet, therefore not required to justify my actions.
All he does is act, pop out somewhere or other from beneath the water. What's essential is the place he chooses to stick out his head. Perhaps he looks back, but the waters close behind him. No way to tell how he got here.
Nor am I good at maths. In maths, what matters is the deduction and the formula, wisely measuring the followed route. For mathematicians, the final result's a trifle, merest evidence and proof. I'd cry, filled with enthusiasm.
It worked.
Maybe, but what?
What was it worked, dear lad?